"Major, those drones are exactly where she said they would be." The words hit the cockpit like ice water, and for the first time since takeoff, Major Daniel Hayes stopped trusting the glowing digital flight path in front of him. Three small shapes had lifted from the dark edge of the canyon, silent against the morning glare, appearing from a pocket of terrain the computer had marked clean just minutes earlier. They were not close enough to strike, not yet, but they were close enough to prove one impossible thing. Lieutenant Emily Carter had been right. Hayes looked down at the secondary display where the scanned image of her handwritten flight plan sat crooked in the corner, a white sheet covered in pencil marks, wind arrows, altitude notes, and one sharp circle drawn around the very ridge now glowing on radar. 2 hours earlier, he had laughed at that paper in front of the entire briefing room. Now, at 18,000 feet above the desert mountains, that same paper looked less like a relic and more like a warning they had ignored. Static scratched across the radio. The canyon walls below rolled in hard brown folds, cut by narrow shadows and dry riverbeds that twisted like old scars through the rock. The official route had looked perfect on the screen back at base, efficient, clean, approved by satellite data and mission software. But now the formation was entering the exact 90-second signal gap Emily had marked by hand. Hayes felt the first flicker of doubt move behind his ribs. He was not a careless officer. He had flown for nearly 20 years, logged more hours than most pilots in the squadron could dream of, and built his reputation on procedure, precision, and control. But this was the kind of moment that punished pride quietly, without raising its voice. On his right wing, Emily's aircraft held steady. No panic, no sharp correction, no desperate radio chatter. Just calm distance, clean alignment, and the kind of discipline that made her jet look almost still against the sky. Her voice came over comms, level and low. Eagle lead, recommend immediate 11-degree right deviation, descend 400 feet, hold sunline behind ridge 2. Hayes stared at the instruments, then at the canyon, then at the 3 drone signatures slipping into position exactly along the path she had predicted. He could still hear his own voice from the briefing room, careless and amused. "Lieutenant, we fly aircraft, not campfire stories." The room had laughed because he had laughed first. Emily had not defended herself. She had simply stood there in her flight suit, silver wing badge catching the fluorescent light, her blue eyes steady on the digital map, while everyone else looked at the paper in her hand like it belonged in a museum. Now the laughter was gone, replaced by alarms, clipped breathing, and the clean math of consequence. Hayes tightened his grip on the controls. "Carter," he said, his voice rougher than before, "you have the route." A half-second passed. Then Emily answered, calm as stone. "Copy. Follow my mark." Emily did not move like someone trying to prove a point. She moved like someone finishing a calculation she had already made long before anyone believed her. Her aircraft eased 11 degrees to the right. Not sharply, not dramatically, just enough to slip away from the line the mission software had drawn through the canyon. One by one, the rest of Eagle Flight followed her mark. The formation dropped 400 feet, settling below the harsh glare line where the sun spilled over the ridge and turned the cockpit glass gold. Hayes watched the drone signatures drift across his display, then hesitate, as if the sky itself had shifted beneath them. They had expected the squadron to stay high, predictable, obedient to the approved route. Emily had known that. Back in the briefing room, while the others had stared at the big digital map, she had been looking at the shadows. She had noticed how the eastern ridge blocked low-band communications for exactly the wrong stretch of airspace. She had noticed how the morning sun would sit behind the west wall at 0800, bright enough to complicate visual tracking. She had noticed the dry wash below, the narrow channel that could create a pocket of uneven wind strong enough to disturb a small drone holding position too close to the rock. None of it had looked important to the computer because the computer did not feel terrain. Emily did. "Hold altitude," she said over the radio. "Do not climb yet. Let them look where we were supposed to be." Hayes followed without arguing. That silence from him carried more weight than any apology could have. In the cockpit, his jaw remained tight, but his eyes were no longer dismissive. They moved between his instruments and the small scanned copy of her handwritten plan, where every line now seemed less like pencil and more like discipline. The lead drone moved toward the original flight path. The second shifted wider. The third lingered near the ridge, searching. No one spoke for several seconds. The only sounds were the controlled breathing of trained pilots, the steady hum of the aircraft, and the clipped pulse of warning tones fading as the formation moved out of the predicted lock zone. Emily kept her voice low. Ridge 2 in 5 seconds. Begin shallow left correction on my count. She counted down like she was reading from the sky itself. 3, 2, 1. Now. The formation curved left, following the darker line of the canyon wall. Below them, dust lifted from the dry riverbed in pale sheets. The aircraft remained steady, each correction small enough to look ordinary and precise enough to matter. Hayes realized then that Emily had not guessed. She had read the mission the way old pilots read weather, pressure, light, and silence. She had seen the trap before the trap had a name. The radio cleared for the first time in nearly a minute. Base control came through broken but audible, asking for status. Hayes glanced once more at the paper in the corner of his screen. Then he keyed his mic. Eagle flight is stable, he said. Carter is navigating us through. Base control's voice steadied as the signal strengthened, but no one in Eagle flight relaxed. The canyon still held them between two walls of sunburned rock, and the approved route behind them was now a bad memory, glowing on every display. Emily kept her aircraft level, her eyes moving from the horizon to her instruments to the ridge line, where the 3 drones continued searching the empty air they had expected the squadron to occupy. She did not sound excited. She did not sound proud. She sounded precise. Eagle lead. They are moving to reacquire from high right. If we climb now, they will catch our heat signature against open sky. Hayes looked at his own display and saw the same thing a second later. The drones were shifting upward, using the ridge as cover, trying to regain the angle the formation had denied them. The old Hayes would have questioned her. The Hayes from the briefing room would have asked for confirmation from the system, from base, from anyone except the lieutenant with pencil marks on paper. But the sky had already answered for her. Your call, he said. Hold low, Emily replied. We ride the wash for another quarter mile, then break left behind the saddle. One of the younger pilots, Captain Ross, came over the channel with tension in his voice. That saddle looks tight. Emily answered without hesitation. It is tight. That is why they will not expect it. There was no arrogance in the sentence, only math, terrain, and nerve. Hayes remembered the briefing again, not the laughter this time, but what came before it. Emily had stood beside the digital map with her handwritten sheet tucked under one arm, waiting while senior officers discussed speed, fuel, and satellite coverage. When she finally stepped forward, she had not asked for attention. She had placed her paper on the table and said there was a weakness in the route. Hayes had seen the pencil lines first and judged them before he listened. He had seen a young female officer with a silver wing badge and a calm face, and he had mistaken calm for inexperience. Now, as the canyon tightened ahead, her calm was the only thing keeping the formation clean. Correction in 10 seconds, Emily said. Stay shallow. Do not overbank. The aircraft slipped toward the left saddle, close enough for the canyon wall to fill the side of Hayes's canopy with rough stone and shadow. The move was not flashy. It was not reckless. It was a pilot understanding space down to inches and seconds. The drones drifted higher, still hunting above the original corridor, their sensors looking into glare and empty sky. Emily led the formation behind the ridge saddle, and for a brief moment the warning tones disappeared completely. The radio cleared. The air smoothed. The formation emerged over a lower valley washed in pale morning light. Behind them, the drones had lost the angle. Hayes exhaled slowly, only then realizing how tightly he had been holding his breath. Captain Ross broke the silence first. Lieutenant Carter, how did you know about that saddle? Emily's aircraft held steady on the right. Her reply came soft, almost distant. Because the map showed the route. The shadows showed the trap. Hayes knew they were not finished. The valley ahead opened wider, but wide air could be dangerous in a different way. It gave a formation room to breathe, and it gave anything watching them room to adjust. Emily seemed to know that before anyone said it. Her jet held low over the valley floor, keeping the sun at an angle that made the aircraft harder to read from the ridge line behind them. The 3 drone signatures had slipped off the primary warning screen, but Emily did not treat absence like safety. She checked the terrain, the light, the timing, and the small delay in the radio signal that still carried a faint scratch under every transmission. Eagle lead. They lost us once, she said. They will try to predict where we recover. Hayes looked toward the approved emergency exit route, a clean climb over the western shelf that every pilot in the squadron had practiced a dozen times in simulation. It was the obvious move. Too obvious. He understood that now. You are saying they are waiting for us at the exit corridor. I am saying I would be, Emily answered. No one spoke after that. The sentence was not dramatic, but it settled over the channel with uncomfortable weight. Captain Ross checked in from the rear of the formation, voice controlled but tighter than before. It cut across a dry basin, dipped behind a broken ridge, then used a narrow service corridor that barely appeared on the digital map. It was old, inconvenient, and easy to overlook. That was why it mattered. We take the maintenance corridor south of Ridge 4, she said. Hayes frowned at his display. That corridor is not on the main route package. It was removed from the package because it is inefficient, Emily said. Not because it is unsafe. Hayes heard the difference. Inefficient meant slower. Inefficient meant less elegant. Inefficient did not mean wrong. For years, the squadron had been trained to trust the cleanest route, the fastest route, the route that looked best on a screen. Emily had looked for the route an enemy planner would dismiss. The formation turned south. Below them, the basin spread out in pale beige and rust, empty except for scrub brush, service tracks, and long shadows from low ridges. The aircraft moved in disciplined spacing, not rushed, not scattered, every pilot following Emily's cadence. Behind them, the three drone signals reappeared near the western shelf exactly where the emergency climb would have taken them. Hayes watched the markers gather around empty sky, and something in his expression changed. It was not shock now. It was recognition. Emily Carter had not simply predicted an ambush. She had predicted the second move after the ambush failed. Base control returned again, clearer this time. Eagle flight, confirm current route. You are off the approved corridor. Hayes keyed his microphone. Eyes still on Emily's aircraft ahead and right. Confirmed, he said. We are on Carter's route. The maintenance corridor looked unimpressive on every screen. A thin gray path crossing rough terrain, with no clean symmetry and no tactical elegance. But Emily followed it with the certainty of someone who had trusted ugly routes before. The squadron stayed low and disciplined, moving across the basin in measured spacing while the canyon fell behind them. Hayes kept his eyes moving, checking fuel, formation, radio clarity, sensor warnings, and Emily's position off his right front. She was not flying like someone enjoying being right. She was flying like someone who understood that being right only mattered if everyone got home. Ridge 4 in 20 seconds, she said. Expect signal bounce from the south face. Ignore the first false return. Captain Ross answered first. Copy, ignoring first false return. A second later, the warning screen flickered with a small contact near the ridge, then dropped it just as quickly. No one chased it. No one broke formation. Emily had taken the surprise out of the sky before it could become confusion. Hayes looked at the scan paper again. The false return was marked there too, not with a dramatic symbol, just a short pencil note written in the margin. South face bounce. Do not climb. He felt a quiet pressure behind his eyes, the kind that came when a leader saw the full shape of his mistake. He had not dismissed her because her math was weak. He had dismissed her because it came wrapped in something he did not expect, a young lieutenant with a calm face, a silver wing badge, and a folded paper in a room addicted to screens. The formation crossed behind Ridge 4, and the air changed. The chop smoothed out. The radio cleared. The drone's signatures faded farther behind them, still circling the wrong recovery corridor. Base control came through, sharper now. Eagle flight, we have your position. Continue south corridor. Support aircraft are monitoring from distance. Maintain current heading. Hayes almost smiled at that. Current heading meant Emily's heading, the heading they had laughed at. Carter, he said quietly over the flight channel. How much farther until we are clear? Her reply came without delay. 2.7 miles to clean signal. 5.1 to safe altitude. Recommend no climb until the second marker. Reason? Hayes asked, but there was no challenge in it now. Only respect sharpened by necessity. Emily paused half a breath, then answered. If they still have passive tracking, the first climb gives them a silhouette. The second marker puts the sun behind us and the ridge below us. It makes us harder to separate from terrain. Hayes nodded, though she could not see him. Understood. The squadron pressed on. For the first time since the alarms had started, the channel felt calm. Not relaxed, not careless, but calm in the way professional pilots become calm when someone competent is leading them through bad air. At the second marker, Emily banked gently and began the climb. The others followed. The valley dropped away beneath them, the ridge line slid under their wings, and the open sky returned clean and blue ahead. No warning tones followed. No drone signatures reappeared. Just sunlight, altitude, and the long silence of men realizing a handwritten plan had outperformed every assumption in the room. The climb out of the valley felt almost too quiet after the canyon. Eagle flight rose through clean blue air, each aircraft holding formation with the careful discipline of pilots who knew how close they had come to trusting the wrong assumption. Hayes kept the squadron on Emily's recommended heading until the signal fully stabilized and base control confirmed a clean corridor back to the airfield. No one joked over the channel. No one filled the silence with nervous relief. The silence itself said enough. Emily remained on the right side of the formation, steady as ever, her jet trimmed clean, her voice calm each time she answered a status check. She did not sound like someone waiting for praise. She sounded like someone already thinking through the debrief, the data, the timing, the small corrections that had kept the route from becoming a mistake. Hayes glanced again at the scanned copy of her handwritten plan. The paper had seemed almost embarrassing in the briefing room, surrounded by glass screens and bright mission software. Now it looked worn, human, and exact. Pencil pressure had darkened the danger circles. Small arrows showed wind movement across ridges. Short notes warned against easy choices. It was not old-fashioned. It was disciplined. It was a mind refusing to let technology replace judgment. When base finally cleared them for return, Hayes gave the order with a voice that had changed. Eagle flight, maintain Carter's sequence for approach. Captain Ross answered immediately. Copy. Carter's sequence. One by one, the other pilots repeated it. The phrase moved through the channel quietly, but it carried the weight of recognition. Emily took the lead for the approach pattern, guiding the formation toward the long runway where heat shimmered above the concrete. The base came into view below them, hangars bright in the sun, support vehicles waiting near the taxiway, ground crew looking upward as the aircraft returned in perfect order. Hayes watched Emily descend first. Her landing was not dramatic. It was smooth, centered, professional, the kind of landing only inexperienced people failed to admire because it looked easy. One by one, the others touched down behind her. When Hayes finally rolled onto the taxiway, he saw her aircraft ahead, slowing with quiet control. The mission was over, but the lesson had not finished landing yet. In the cockpit, Hayes removed his gloves and sat for one extra second before opening the canopy. He could still hear the briefing room laughter. He could still see Emily standing beside the table, holding that folded sheet, while everyone else treated confidence as if it belonged only to the loudest voice. On the tarmac, Emily climbed down from her aircraft and adjusted the silver wing badge on her flight suit. She did not look toward the watching crowd. She did not need to. Hayes stepped onto the concrete, holding the printed copy of her plan in one hand, and for the first time that morning, he walked toward her without doubt. Hayes reached Emily just as the last engine whine softened across the tarmac. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Around them, ground crew moved with practiced efficiency, checking panels, guiding equipment, signaling across the flight line, but the space between Hayes and Emily felt separate from all of it. He held the printed copy of her plan in his right hand, the same paper he had once lifted in the briefing room, like it was proof of her inexperience. Now the edges were bent from the cockpit, and the pencil marks looked darker under the desert sun. Emily stood beside her aircraft with her helmet tucked under one arm, flight suit creased from the mission, silver wing badge bright against her chest. Her expression was calm, not cold, not triumphant, just steady in a way that made Hayes feel the full weight of what he had missed. Captain Ross approached from behind him, then stopped a few feet away, as if he understood this was not his moment to interrupt. Two other pilots lingered near their aircraft, quiet now, the same men who had smirked when Hayes made the first joke. No one looked at Emily like she was an oddity anymore. They looked at her like a pilot who had brought them home. Hayes glanced down at the paper, then back at her. Lieutenant Carter, he said, and his voice carried just far enough for the nearby pilots to hear. Your route kept this formation intact. Emily gave a small nod. The terrain gave us the route, sir. I just followed what it showed. It was the kind of answer that should have embarrassed anyone who had mistaken humility for weakness. Hayes took that in, then looked past her to the ridge line far beyond the base, where the mountains sat quiet and innocent under the afternoon light. In the briefing room, he said, slower now, I made a judgment before I listened. Emily did not soften the moment for him. She did not rescue him from the truth. She simply waited. That was worse than anger. Anger would have given him something to answer. Her silence forced him to stand inside his own mistake. That will not happen again, Hayes said. The words were simple, but every pilot nearby heard them clearly. Captain Ross lowered his eyes for a second. One of the younger pilots shifted his weight, ashamed without being called out. Emily looked at Hayes, then at the plan in his hand. Permission to include the raw terrain notes in the debrief, sir? Hayes almost smiled, not because the moment was light, but because she was already back at work. No speech, no demand for credit, no performance. Just the next useful thing. Permission granted, he said. Then he handed the paper back to her with both hands, like it deserved more care than he had given it before. Emily accepted it, folded it once along the original crease, and placed it against her kneeboard. Hayes turned toward the waiting pilots. Debrief in 20 minutes, he said. And this time, Lieutenant Carter briefs first. 20 minutes later, the briefing room felt smaller than it had that morning. The same screens glowed on the walls, the same mission table sat under the white overhead lights, and the same pilots took their seats with their helmets resting beside them. But the room no longer belonged to the loudest voice. It belonged to the facts. Emily stood at the front with her handwritten flight plan unfolded beside the digital route display. The paper looked plain against the technology around it, but no one laughed now. Hayes stood near the back of the room with his arms folded, not as a judge, not as a man waiting to correct her, but as an officer listening to the person who had seen what the rest of them missed. Emily began with the approved corridor, tracing the original path on the screen, then placed one finger on the first ridge shadow she had marked before takeoff. The system measured distance, she said. It did not account for how the canyon would bend the signal at this hour. Her voice stayed even, clear enough for every pilot and technician to follow. She explained the 90-second gap, the sun angle, the false return off the south face, and the emergency exit corridor that had looked safe because it looked obvious. Each point connected to the next with quiet precision. There was no drama in how she presented it. That made it harder to dismiss. Captain Ross leaned forward, studying the pencil notes. You saw all of that before we launched. Emily shook her head once. I saw enough to know the official route needed a second look. Hayes watched the room absorb that answer. She was not claiming perfection. She was showing discipline. A good pilot did not need to know everything. A good pilot needed to notice when something did not fit. One of the younger pilots, the same one who had smiled at the phrase campfire stories, raised his hand slightly. Lieutenant, why did you write it by hand instead of building a digital overlay? Emily looked at the paper, then back at him. Because drawing it forced me to slow down. The software gave me a route in seconds. My hand made me question every mile. The room went still in a different way then. Not tense. Humbled. Hayes stepped forward and placed a small mission recorder on the table. The flight data confirms every major correction Lieutenant Carter called in the air, he said. The drone pattern, the false return, the second recovery point, all of it. He looked around the room, letting the words land where laughter had been. From now on, every route package gets a human terrain review before approval. Emily folded her plan carefully, the silver wing badge on her chest catching the light as she moved. She did not smile. She did not need to. The room had changed, and everyone in it knew why. After the debrief, the room emptied slowly. Pilots who had rushed out of briefings all year now lingered by the mission table, studying the paper Emily had left beside the digital map, as if it had become part of the equipment. Hayes remained near the screen, watching the final flight path replay in blue across the terrain model. The approved route ran straight through the blind pocket. Emily's route bent around it, dropped low through the basin, passed behind Ridge 4, and climbed only when the sun and terrain were finally on their side. It was not the prettiest line. It was the line that had worked. Across the room, Emily gathered her kneeboard and flight gloves with the same quiet care she had shown all day. The silver wing badge on her chest caught the overhead light once, a small flash against the worn fabric of her flight suit. Hayes had noticed it before only as decoration. Now he understood it differently. Some symbols were not made to impress strangers. Some were reminders a person carried when no one else believed them. Captain Ross stopped beside her on his way out. "Lieutenant," he said, a little awkwardly, "next time you draw a route, I would like to see it before wheels up." Emily looked at him, then nodded. "Bring the terrain charts. We will compare both." It was not forgiveness dressed up for comfort. It was professionalism, which was cleaner and harder to fake. One by one, the others left. Hayes waited until the door closed behind the last pilot. Then he walked to the table where Emily stood folding the map along its old creases. "Carter," he said. She looked up. "Sir." For a moment, the same silence from the tarmac returned, but it no longer felt heavy with mistake. It felt honest. Hayes placed the mission recorder beside her paper. "I recommended your terrain review process be added to squadron procedure." Emily did not react quickly. Her eyes moved to the recorder, then back to him. "That will slow approvals." "Good," Hayes said. "Some things should be slowed down." The faintest change passed through her expression, not quite a smile, but close enough to show she had heard the respect inside the decision. Outside the briefing room windows, the late sun stretched across the runway, turning the parked aircraft into dark shapes against gold light. The base was settling back into routine, but something inside the squadron had shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough that the next quiet warning would be heard before Pride had a chance to laugh at it. Hayes picked up the folded copy of Emily's plan and handed it to her again, this time without ceremony, because respect did not always need ceremony when it was real. "Next mission," he said, "you brief first." Emily tucked the paper beneath her arm, touched 2 fingers briefly to the silver wing badge on her chest, and looked toward the runway where tomorrow's aircraft waited. "Then we had better start with the shadows," she said. Hayes followed her gaze, and this time he listened.